which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Not noticed very much, George Galloway yesterday said the next election will be all about the Muslim vote. We debate, is he actually right? The budget coming up tomorrow, and we're being told, yes, Jeremy Hunt tells us, that we're going to cut back on funding for all sorts of diversity and inclusion managers. But haven't we heard all of this before? And of course, in America, it is Super Tuesday. It looks like Trump and Biden are going to win, but we talked to a top American pollster. How are things looking ahead of the November the 5th general election? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, our top story tonight is that tomorrow the Chancellor will unveil the new budget, and it's being rumoured he could announce a 2 pence in the pound cut to national insurance contributions. Jeremy Hunt is aiming to put the UK's economy and Rishi Sunak's popularity back on the road to recovery. That's despite the fiscal watchdog giving the government little scope for tax cuts. Analysts are saying the NHS could be facing real-term funding cuts of £2 billion annually amid rising costs and a promise to tackle waiting lists. And our other main story tonight, the leader of Labour-led Birmingham City Council has unreservedly apologised to the city's residents for the budget set out today. The cost-cutting plan includes taking more than £300 million away from public services across Britain's biggest city, second biggest city, after it effectively declared itself bankrupt last year. Councillor John Cotton described the cuts as a result of a raging crisis in local government caused by the Conservatives, calling them cheerleaders for austerity. At the same time, Birmingham City Council is planning to raise council taxes by just less than 10% a year. Suella Braverman told GB News today she doesn't believe the former Tory MP Lee Anderson is Islamophobic. Today's exclusive interview with the former Home Secretary comes after Mr Anderson claimed Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London.
He is not racist, he is not Islamophobic. He's calling out very poor performance by the Mayor of London, who has completely failed to hold the Met Commissioner to account, and which is why we've seen emboldened Islamism in the streets of London. We've seen an MP hounded out of office because of Islamism.
Downing Street says the new customs partnership led by Britain and France will make a difference to small boat crossings. Number 10 says the joint work's already delivering, with more than 26,000 small boat crossing attempts across the English Channel prevented last year. It comes after more than 400 people made the crossing in 7 small boats yesterday. That's the highest number in a single day this year. GB News understands that the policing of pro-Palestinian protests in London this weekend will remain unchanged despite the Prime Minister's call for a crackdown on extremists. Officers will reportedly use existing public order and anti-terror laws. It's after Rishi Sunak called on the police to draw a line and clamp down on extremist behaviour. And in the United States, Donald Trump's expected to dominate today's Super Tuesday, as it's called, further strengthening his grip on the Republican Party nomination. We can bring you live pictures coming to us here from the United States, where those primaries are underway. The polls are open in Virginia, one of 15 states where voters choosing their preferred presidential candidate. Mr. Trump's only remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, who's pictured there if you're watching on television, is struggling to secure enough wins to stay in the race. However, the former president's various legal troubles may cause some problems. He's currently facing 91 criminal charges across 4 states. For the latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, it was a big day yesterday for George Galloway. Of course, as he was sworn in to Parliament, he gave a 45-minute press conference outside the St Stephen's entrance to the Palace of Westminster. And there was a comment there that I don't think really got the pickup in today's press that it deserved. Let's listen to what George Galloway had to say yesterday.
So that's what I'm predicting here. The next election will be about Muslims and will be about the taking away of civil liberties in this country. It's Sunak's last hope. I pray for the social peace of our country that it's a forlorn hope.
There you are. The next election will be about Muslims. I pray for the peace in our country. Quite disturbing words. I've said to you for months that full-on religious sectarian politics was coming to this country. I've had guest after guest in the studio telling me, Nigel, you're wrong. It absolutely isn't going to happen. But when you see him saying the next election will be all about Muslims, you realise we are there, folks, already. What did George Galloway mean? Well, what he meant was following the speech given on Friday outside Number 10 by Rishi Sunak, where Sunak said we can't have our society being torn apart. What Galloway is saying is the government will start to get tough on people who march in the streets, chant from the river to the sea, which, as you well know, means not just the abolition of the State of Israel, but in many cases what they really mean is getting rid of the Jews as well. That they won't allow these kind of protests. They won't allow this kind of intimidation. They won't allow mobs to gather outside Parliament. Won't allow them to harass MPs, local councillors, and that the police are going to get tough. And what George is saying is that Sunak is in desperate electoral trouble. He will do this. He will challenge Keir Starmer to say where he really stands on this issue, and that will leave the Muslim community isolated. And what George really means is he wants the Muslim community to feel put upon. He wants them to feel they haven't got the same rights as the rest of us in this country. This is the politics of full-on religious division. He wants Muslims to feel that they somehow aren't as equal in Britain to the rest of us. When it comes to him talking about he fears for the peace, well, I fear for the peace. I fear for what happened in Parliament Square just the other week. I fear for fundraising dinners, council meetings that are being set upon by 20 or 30 young men. I fear for the electoral process, given some of the astonishing and I think truly awful things that happened up in Rochdale last week, including intimidation, death threats, and all the rest of it. But is he right? In electoral terms, is the next election all about Muslims? I want your thoughts on this, please. Farage@gbnews.com. In a funny way, the Muslim vote could make a very, very big difference to Labour. I met not an hour ago a Conservative member of Parliament. He's got a very small majority. Labour are challenging him. But if Galloway's party puts up a candidate, he'll probably hold his seat. So there could be all sorts of consequences. But what about the very concept of the Muslim vote, of now the organisation called the Muslim vote? Is this a good, healthy thing? I worry that it's deeply, deeply divisive. Well, I'm joined by Mohammed Ankanji, solicitor, who is standing as an independent parliamentary candidate for Bethnal Green and Stepney at the next election and famously was a lawyer for Shamima Begum. Mohammed, you were going to stand as an independent in this seat. Are you now tempted to join George Galloway?
No, I've come on the ticket as an independent. And I think that's very important because my constituents haven't felt that they've heard or been heard by their existing politicians, and an independent candidate has an advantage in that they can listen to the constituents and formulate a manifesto based on what they say and what we hear, rather than have a manifesto shoved down their throat.
Now, you've got, obviously, a constituency with a very high proportion of Muslims in it. Mm-hmm. What would that represent in voting terms?
About 46%.
Yeah, so it's half and half. What is it they haven't been listened to about?
Well, pretty much all their issues are, in terms of the average age or death rate for the average man in our constituency is 10 years less than the average. So if you look at that in terms of what that means for individuals there, it means the type of life sort of problems that they're suffering are bringing down their age by almost a fifth of their lifespan.
There's a similar comparison, actually, between Glasgow and Surrey.
Yep.
Again, with a 11-year difference or whatever it is.
And Kensington is the highest.
And that's about poverty. Mm-hmm. That's about
access to healthcare, access to social services.
Is there an access to healthcare problem?
There is an access to healthcare problem in that we have a very high population density in Bethnal Green, and yet in terms of waiting lists and the services that are available to people when they need them, it's particularly problematic. We have a slightly ageing population as well, and the post sort of orthopaedic care is very, very difficult.
So are these, Mohammed, issues of health, deprivation, low educational attainment, low income, or do you see those as being linked to the Muslim religion?
Well, I'd say that they are not just unique to Bethnal Green, and they're not unique to Muslims in Bethnal Green. You'll find that if you look in certain constituencies in Wales or Teesside, as you mentioned as well.
Yeah.
But what we do have is a political class that's ignored certain groups of people. You yourself will know that you've tapped into an unsung millions when talking about the Brexit vote. And in this case, we have many people, and not just Muslims at all, who are protesting about key issues, one of those being the issue in Gaza, and being felt that they're not being heard. Now, Gaza isn't the straw that broke the camel's back. It's the thing that proves that the constituents are not being listened to.
And that's why Galloway, in his acceptance speech in the hall, the first sentence was, "This is for Gaza."
Well, I think it's important that the British people have always been about justice and always been about fair play. And they've spoken in the polls, in terms of Murray polls, they've spoken on the streets, and they have, to the tune of 71% of the British people generally in the country, have been against this genocide. Yet...
Hang on. I mean, genocide is a way over-the-top term, isn't it? It's a way over-the-top term. You know, we use genocide in the context of a willful, deliberate attempt to get rid of a group of people. This is not that. There is no way, whatever the flaws, however over the top the Israelis are, they are not attempting a genocide.
What the legal definition of a genocide is, the International Court of Justice has already ruled that the behaviour of Israel in Gaza is at the foothills of a genocide, right. And that is yet to be listened to.
Even if it's at the foothills, it is not a genocide. You see, I mean, I worry about this. I mean, you know, you tweeted on October the 7th, after those barbaric, appalling, shocking attacks, and indeed there are still hostages in Gaza still suffering today. You said the option of settler colonization just got taken off the table. What did you mean by that?
So in terms of the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian lands, that is by definition called the occupation.
So Israel shouldn't exist?
Israel should not be allowed to illegally occupy Palestinian territory.
So Israel shouldn't exist?
I don't know why you keep repeating that.
Well, I'm asking you whether that's what you really mean.
No, what I mean is quite clear, that settler occupation, the illegal occupation of Israeli land, of Palestinian territory, which is the British foreign policy position, is called illegally occupied territory, should not exist.
You see, I mean, the question I'm really asking you, Mohammed, is where do your loyalties really lie? Do your loyalties lie with this country, with the people of this country as a collective, or do they lie with a particular group, you know, for example, a Muslim group, not just in your constituency, but more broadly across the country? Where do your loyalties actually lie?
So if you look at my position, particularly even on Gaza is the most recent one, but my loyalties lie with where 71% of the British public's loyalty lie on that issue.
On a snapshot at this moment in time.
With the royal family, in terms of Prince William coming out saying that he doesn't want to see any more death there. The royal family's been very clear about that position as well.
There are lots of people.
That our political elite are not happy with is what the British people are saying about this issue.
There are lots of unhappy people. I get that. I understand that. They hate what they're seeing in Gaza. I get all of that. I fully understand it. I also understand that if Israel don't wipe out Hamas, they'll cross the border and do it again. So they're in a very difficult position. What I'm saying to you is, the politics that's emerging from George Galloway, what you're saying to me now, albeit in far more subtle and gentle tones, is that what happens in Gaza seems to matter more than what's happening in Bethnal Green.
What's happening in the UK is that we have austerity. We've had it for 13 years.
No, we haven't. And the national debt's got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, we can speak to Sunak as to why he claims that's been happening, but it's been getting bigger and bigger, partly because of the pandemic and the misuse of our funds in that pandemic. It's been getting bigger because of our commitment to foreign wars. That's not a foreign issue. Ukraine is not a foreign issue, and Israel-Gaza is not a foreign issue. The money's been taken away from our people.
These are actually relatively small sums of money compared to bigger issues. I mean, look, let's get back to the key of what George said. George Galloway said the next election will be about Muslims. Is he right?
Well, certainly if Sunak has his way, it will be.
So what was Sunak doing, in your view?
Well, Sunak was recategorising people, general people. The majority of people who have been on these protests are not Muslims. At least 80% are non-Muslims who have been on these pro-Palestinian protests.
There are plenty of white middle-class girls on these marches, etc. I understand.
There's plenty of Jewish people on these marches.
I very much doubt that.
I've stood with them.
I very much doubt that.
You're welcome to come to the next one with me.
I think if I turned up, in Jewish kid, I'm not sure I'd be very welcome. You know as well as I do, some of the chanting, some of what's been said has been vile and obnoxious and quite openly racist.
And that's exactly what our police force have been contending with. They've been arresting the very tiny numbers of people who have been chanting things that are unacceptable. And, we pay for a police force to police our freedom of expression. The vast majority of people there have been well within the law and have no intention of breaking the law. The few that have been dealt with and have been arrested, and everyone agrees with the fact that anyone who breaks the law should be arrested.
Is it acceptable to put from the river to the sea up on the Elizabeth Tower beneath Big Ben?
I find that entirely unproblematic. Unproblematic.
So a phrase that represents the abolition of a state and its people,
the phrase,
you find unproblematic?
So the phrase has been used by Benjamin Netanyahu himself in order to suggest that Israel should push out the entirety of the Palestinian people. The exact same phrase.
That is not what it means to those crowds, and you know that, and I know that.
Well, I don't know if you've taken a poll, but, it certainly means something to Palestinians in Palestine. It means something to some people in the UK, but in the context of a pro-Palestinian rally where Westminster has put up a flag of the Israeli state in that place, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be apartheid-free, is not a phrase that's problematic.
Is religious sectarian politics here to stay?
No, I don't think it is at all. I think it's been cast that way, and I think it's been wrongly cast that way.
If one religion votes overwhelmingly for a candidate, as they did in Rochdale, and really, let's be honest, what you're trying to do in Bethnal Green and Stepney, that is by definition sectarianism.
The Jewish voice for Labour has been part of the Labour Party since the 1920s. In terms of the three main parties, we've got the Labour Friends of Israel, Labour Friends of Conservatives.
But that's why you guys are all breaking away from the Labour Party.
No, that's not why we're breaking away from the Labour Party.
It feels like it. What Galloway's saying, what Chris Williamson's saying.
The reason why people are breaking away from the Labour Party and traditional politics is because when we express ourselves as a populace, 71% of the population saying they want something.
You keep saying that, and that's a snapshot of the poll where we are right now.
That's a figure that won't change, because that's representative of the British people at this point.
But if you also ask them how high a priority was Gaza compared to health, open borders, etc., it wouldn't be very high.
You'll get a different range of views from different places.
Well, you will. Well, I certainly get a different range of views from you to me.
Well, sure, I'm here to represent Bethnal Green and Stepney, and that's what my constituents are concerned about, and it's higher up the priority than maybe in other places.
I'll have a bet with you that you finish up standing with George Galloway's Workers' Party.
I don't do bets on politics.
No, well, I do. Folks, there we are. You can see some of the arguments that are being made in this case with a lot more subtlety and dignity than we get from people like Chris Williamson, I am very pleased to say. It is Super Tuesday. That means that 15 states and one overseas territory are voting today. It looks like Trump is going to win overwhelmingly. Biden, the Democrats, are going to win overwhelmingly. And we're heading for a rematch on November the 5th this year of what happened in 2020. I will be joined by a top American pollster, Scott Rasmussen, to ask how the scores on the door's looking ahead of this epic contest.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
So after his mad dash to see his father last week, Prince Harry predictably went on TV to talk about it. He gave his first interview to Good Morning America, whilst apparently being filmed by a crew that were doing a documentary on the Invictus Games. He didn't disclose his father's diagnosis, but frankly, even the fact that he was on TV talking about it was concerning. No wonder they're keeping him at arm's length. This is what he said.
How did you get the news that the king was ill?
I spoke to him.
And what did you do next?
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family.
Absolutely.
Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together.
He also said that he loves his family, but then he said that he had his own family in America. So which family does he love? The late Queen's last few years of life were marred with accusations of racism, which Harry later backtracked on, claiming that they hadn't actually used the word, so inadvertently admitting to gaslighting us all. But the Sussex's stock is falling in the States, and the only thing that makes them interesting is their proximity to the royal family. And now the king is ill, Harry has even offered to muck in and take on official duties to help his father. Look, I want to see reconciliation and love and joy, but I'm afraid Meghan has yet to even speak to her father as far as we know, and Harry didn't apparently even reach out to his brother. Whilst his dad might fall for it, I doubt William will be as soft. Good luck with that, Harry.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Super Tuesday. It's the biggest primary day of the 4-year presidential cycle. And what it means is that in 15 states and 1 overseas territory, Republicans will be voting for their nominee. And in 16 states, because Iowa was a big postal vote, which of course was done by the Republicans back in January, in 16 different areas, it'll be decided by the Democrats plus 1 overseas territory. Well, I'm joined by Scott Rasmussen, president of RMG Research down the line from the USA. Scott, normally Super Tuesday is super exciting because there are lots of candidates, they're in contention, you don't quite know who's going to come out on top, and Super Tuesday can turn the tide of a campaign for the nomination. But this one, well, it's all over before it begins, really, isn't it?
Oh, it is. 4 years ago, we thought Michael Bloomberg had a chance to become the Democratic nominee, and he had a face plant on his debate beforehand, and that ended it. But this year, look, as long as they're still breathing on Election Day, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are going to be the competitors for their parties.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's position clearly enormously strong, and I was with him last week, actually, and despite all the legal challenges, he seems pretty strong, pretty confident. In the case of Biden, Scott, I mean, your polling on how people view President Biden in terms of his age and his competence, it doesn't make very happy reading, does it?
It does not. All the polls show that people are concerned about the current president's age, but I think that's missing the point. You know, what's really going on here is people have had 4 years of President Biden in office. The Democrats continue to talk about Donald Trump as if the character of Donald Trump is the only issue in the campaign. The Trump campaign is talking about issues that people care about, the economy and immigration and crime. And that's why the former president looks like he's in pretty good shape at this point in time.
He does. Now, of course, you know, the funny thing is this massive country with a huge population, and yet, really, the next president of America is down to, I think it's about 300,000 voters in key swing states, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in, you know, Arizona.
Yeah, there's about 7 states that are swing states at this point in time. And I think this is where you begin to see the dynamics a little more clearly. The national polling shows the race very close between President Biden and President Trump. Trump may have a very modest edge right now. But 4 years ago, Donald Trump lost the popular vote by 4.5 points, and he came within fewer than 100,000 votes of winning the Electoral College. In 2016, he lost the popular vote by 3 points and did win the presidency. So if the popular vote is a tie this time around, you would expect to see those swing states leaning in President Trump's direction. That's what all the polling shows right now. But it does. It comes down to Arizona and Nevada and Georgia and Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Those are the races we'll be watching as the year goes on.
Yeah, and you know, I've been saying, Scott, for some time that I just can't see the Democrats sticking with Biden. But what method would they have to remove him?
Well, the technical method is very simple. At the beginning of every Democratic convention and Republican convention, there is a vote to adopt the rules of the convention. So in theory, the Democratic delegates could say, nobody is bound. No matter what primaries a candidate won, the delegates are now free to choose whoever they want. So technically, the Democrats could do that. In the 1980 Democratic convention, I was there at Madison Square Garden. That was the first vote when Ted Kennedy tried to overtake Jimmy Carter. It didn't work then. It won't work today. And the reason for that primarily is even if they got Joe Biden out of the race, there's no clear candidate who would be stronger. It would be a very divisive fight. Kamala Harris would assume that she's the next nominee. A lot of people in the Democratic Party would not like that. And I think the dynamics of the Democratic Party right now would mean that if Joe Biden were to step down, the nominee would be much further to the left politically, far more progressive than the American people are. And that would be a disaster for the Democratic Party.
Well, there we are. It looks, Scott, like it's going to be a rerun of November 2020, but maybe with a different outcome. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on GB News. Thank you very much indeed. Now, a Newcastle grooming gang have been jailed for raping a 13-year-old girl. Very, very long prison sentences. Christina Curtis is here with the full story.
Yes, Nigel, it's a really shocking case. So what we know so far is that last Friday, 4 men were sentenced for a total of more than 36 years.
I mean, they're big sentences.
Yeah, really big. And this was after they were found to run a grooming gang in Newcastle. So brothers Omar and Mohammed Badruddin and Hussein Al-Baud were found guilty of multiple rapes. Hamoud Al-Sawami was found guilty of sexual assault. Now, they were aged between 15 and 21 when they committed these crimes. They abused a 13-year-old girl multiple times between a period between August 2018 and April 2019. So we know that the two Badruddin brothers came to the UK as refugees from the war in Syria. But what's since been pieced together is that actually Omar, the older brother, in May 2016, when he was 18, was actually accused of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old in a park in Newcastle, along with 2 others. Now, GB News found that during that time, BBC Newsnight had actually been following and filming Omar and his family for a piece they were working on. Now, in October 2016, this was after a 2-week trial, Omar and 2 others were actually cleared of all charges. They were acquitted. And on that very same same day the BBC ran their piece. And they released a programme which had Omar on it, and in it he said and spoke of his relief of being cleared, saying that his feeling when he was in prison for a month was that it would have been better for him if he'd stayed in Syria or Jordan, because it was all unfair and unjust. Now, we fast forward to less than 2 years later, and this is, like I said, between August 2018 to April 2019. We now know that Omar, who was now 20 at the time, groomed and raped a 13-year-old girl as part of a grooming gang alongside his brother Mohammed and 2 others. Now, during the trial, it was heard that this victim was extremely vulnerable, and she was repeatedly abused in different locations around Newcastle city centre, behind a burger restaurant, even in her own home, and she was groomed and plied with alcohol and cigarettes. She was threatened by them, and they threatened to kill her, to kidnap her, and it was said in court, it was described that she was treated like a toy in the gang. They really exploited her and found her entertaining. So as we said, on Friday, the 1st of March, that was Omar and the 3 associates were sentenced. Omar received the longest sentence, that was 18 years, and it was heard in court in his mitigating sentence. In the mitigating bit was that he'd been haunted by his experiences in Syria, and that he felt deep shame and guilt for being put in prison. Now, we have had a statement from the BBC, because we went to them, obviously, following the fact that they ran it on Newsnight. They said that they can only report on the facts as they stand at the time, which is what they did in 2016. They said that the Badreddin's subsequent crimes are appalling, and they expressed their sincere sympathies to their victim. But just one more thing that actually came out in court was that both the brothers Mohammed and Omar, their sentences actually included a year each, because they were at a Black Lives Matter protest which clashed with the North East Frontline Patriots in Newcastle city centre. So they were charged because they threw bottles and sort of had a charge at police, so they were done for violent disorder. This was actually whilst they were on bail for these crimes. So it's a really, really shocking story.
Unbelievable. Yeah, well, the fact they supported Black Lives Matter doesn't surprise me at all. But what annoys me, folks, Christina's laid out the case, is this. Back in 2016, I sensed something was really very, very badly wrong. And an article that appeared in the Daily Express way back then, 12th of June, 2016. The incident finally came to light on Friday when Newsnight admitted the subject of their feature had taken a disturbing turn. And I was quoted in that article as saying, serious questions need to be asked about both the vetting of those the BBC, of the government are allowing into this country, and of the authorities, including the BBC, who appear to have been involved in a conspiracy of silence over the case. I could see back in 2016 there was something very badly, fundamentally wrong here, and yet this person avoided prison, avoided deportation, and has gone on to commit these crimes again. And that's what makes me angry. I think all of this was completely and utterly avoidable. He was acquitted at the end of a trial. Things have gone wrong. This should have been dealt with back then. In a moment, it's the budget tomorrow, and we've got a promise. The Chancellor says no more money to fund woke causes like diversity and inclusion. But doesn't he have a bit of a track record that suggests that might not ever actually happen?
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Yeah, so describe the contents of the letter for us, because it is quite strongly worded, isn't it? And it suggests that your property is empty. And what do they suggest it's going to be used for?
They say, as part of this process, Northamptonshire Council is identifying empty properties and sites within the area, with the aim of encouraging owners to bring premises back into use or to find alternative options for derelict sites. The resettlement team in North Northamptonshire Council supports asylum seekers and refugees across 3 different projects: Homes for Ukraine, Afghan resettlement and asylum dispersal. At present, we are seeing a considerable increase in positive immigration decisions being made in favour of asylum seekers. So basically, they're wanting accommodation. But who goes around and assesses whether these properties are lived in or they are actually empty?
Clearly, Ted, no one had bothered to come and look at your house at all, had they?
What do you want now? Because clearly you are both very shaken by this letter, and that letter that you've received in response has not gone far enough. Do you want an apology? What more do you want to see?
Well, she said here that she's, you know, I sincerely apologise, this Lindsay Bellchambers, but I don't see, there was no explanation as to how they've come to say this property was empty, whether it was disused, whether it was unkempt, or what. If you go back through the history of the property, it's not been empty.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I asked you, was George Galloway right to say the next election will be all about Muslims? John says the election will be all about the postal vote. John, the postal vote in Rochdale was 43% of the overall turnout. The election was pretty much over a fortnight before polling day. Something has to change. Do the Tories have the guts to do it? Don't hold your breath. Mick says the Muslim vote will definitely influence the next election simply because the multicultural society which is celebrated by the elite is a myth. What Mick, the point I'm making is, you know, that they appear, many in the Muslim community now, to want to vote en bloc. At least that's what we saw from Rochdale. Another says, of course it is, just look at Rochdale. Now, it's a budget tomorrow, but it's all going to be fine. It's all going to be OK, because actually what Jeremy Hunt's going to make sure is that less money gets spent on hiring diversity and inclusion officers. But I ask GB News' reporter Adam Cherry, haven't we heard all of this before?
We certainly have, Nigel. So, yes, today in the BBC News today we see Jeremy Hunt's going to force councils to cut back on this sort of spending. We had this very similar thing in the Telegraph on Saturday.
And that's because the councils keep asking for more money as several go bust around the country.
Exactly, right, exactly. But, I mean, I personally have covered this hobby horse of the Tories before many, many times. We hear this practically every time there's an autumn statement or a budget. So just to give you a brief précis of this. So on the 29th of October last year, which was just before the autumn statement, we had in the Telegraph, Jeremy Hunt has told government departments to lay off diversity managers if they want to bring in more staff. Total hiring freeze across Whitehall. Previously, we had in the Standard a letter from the then Health Secretary Steve Barclay saying he was concerned that many local NHS organisations are actively recruiting into dedicated diversity roles. Similarly, at the Tory Party conference, again, we see the same sort of movements from Jeremy Hunt. So he said a lot about this in just the last 6 months. If you go back a little bit further, he's not the first person from the Tory Party under whom this entire problem has spawned and become significantly worse. He's not the first person to claim that they will address it. So here we have, in January, we also had Guido Fawkes reporting a similar thing, but in June of 2022, which was when Sajid Javid was the Health Secretary at the time, seems like a long time ago. It does. But this is what he said to the House of Commons when he was still the Health Secretary. So take a look at this.
This doesn't mean more people working in diversity, but fewer. In my view, there are already too many of these roles, and at a time when our constituents are facing some real pressures around the cost of living, we must spend every penny with care. Instead of farming out important work to a specific group of managers, it must be seen as everyone's responsibility, with everyone accountable for extending fairness and equal opportunities at work.
So there you have it, a clear intention to make this better, at least at the time. That was June 2022. Yeah. We're now in March 2024. It actually goes back even further than that. It goes all the way back to 2009 when this started, this industry, if you like. So in 2009, we have a Daily Mail article, anger after civil servants sent to lavish £2,000 retreat for, quote, irrelevant diversity training. So this sounds familiar. It's exactly the sort of thing that Jeremy Hunt talks about nowadays. And here we have Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Nick Hurd, who was a Conservative MP at the time, attacking the then Labour government for doing exactly the same thing. At a time when millions face losing their jobs and government debt is at record levels, do Labour ministers really think that sending civil servants on 5-day diversity courses at a luxury hotel costing almost £2,000 a pop is prudent and the right thing to do? So we've heard this for years and years and years and years.
So we're going to get this statement tomorrow in the House of Commons from Jeremy Hunt, yet at the same time there are still jobs advertised everywhere.
Yeah. In fact, if you go onto the NHS website right now, as of 5 minutes ago, I just checked, we have 5 new diversity jobs here. So we have one diversity and inclusion lead at a hospice, equality, diversity and inclusion officer in Salisbury, another one in Wolverhampton, another one in Gloucestershire, and another one in South Yorkshire. Now, the salaries for these jobs vary. Sometimes, previously, we've seen these go up to 6 figures. Right? They're enormous salaries. At the moment, this one is about 60,000, but they're still going on, despite even what you've seen in that clip there from the Health Secretary almost 2 years ago. They cannot fix this, and it's been going on for years.
Right. Thank you, Adam, very much indeed. And yes, you'll hear it again tomorrow. And guess what'll happen? Absolutely nothing. Now, North Face, you know, the company that do all the big outdoor equipment. Well, here's a real what the Farage moment. Because if you, as a customer, complete one of their racial inclusion courses dealing with subjects such as white privilege, you will get a 20% discount off their outdoor kit. And why is all this happening? Well, they say the dial moved further in June 2020 when George Floyd was murdered by the police in Minneapolis. Quite why something that happened in Minneapolis should affect us here is quite beyond me. Sparking a global movement for racial justice and the Black Lives Matter movement. So here we have a private company that's supposed to be capitalist advocating for a Marxist organisation that wants to bring down Western civilization. And what they're saying is there's not enough inclusion, there are not enough ethnic minorities going out hell walking at the weekend, but if you fill in their course on white privilege and much else, you can get a discount. God help us. You know, we've got enough problems with the public sector, as I discussed with Adam a moment ago, with diversity and inclusion jobs costing a fortune, but I'm afraid the woke is stuck in the corporates as well. And a story that amused me a little bit this morning, as smoking rates are declining and cigarettes tomorrow will probably go up to a standard charge of 16 quid a pack. We now find Gen Z, that's the youngsters, there's been a 5-fold increase in them smoking cigars and pipes. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not allowed to say, but clearly it's a reaction of some kind. As we came off air last night, my favourite person in the country, Archbishop Welby, entered the Rwanda debate and drew comparisons between this government and Hitler's Nazi government in Germany in the 1930s. I am not joking. All of that in 2 minutes.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
People in this field and they talk about mental health assistance. And I know from personal experience within my own family circle that the help is just not there.
I know that with speaking to many families who've got autistic children and adults. They are really struggling at the moment, whether it's to do with education, getting a diagnosis. You know, once they get to 18 to 25, where's the help? There isn't the help there with social care. You know, I just set up a petition as well, who's going to look after my sons when I'm no longer around? Because that's what that's the story and the question that's at the back of every parent's mind. It's just so hard at the moment, and lots of small charities are closing. And for me, they're the backbone of the society, because they're the ones that speak, you know, to parents continually all the time, or autistic adults. So,
and why has it to be that way? And, you know, we'll get government minister after government minister coming on and saying, we have greatly added to the resource here. We've had another 2.5 people we've hired last year, and whatever. They twist statistics and they make it all sound good. But I know from the work I do in the charitable world, and I know from people who I know personally, it just isn't there. So stop telling it is. And the thing is, the demand for mental health care has just ballooned.
The earlier you start working with children who are autistic, the better the outcomes. I've seen it myself, and I know it with my own sons. I shouldn't have had to set up a school and remortgage my home, you know, for my boys. And so many parents are still struggling, like 20-odd years from when my boys were diagnosed, and they're saying it's improving, and we're talking about awareness, we're talking about acceptance. It's hard because I'm juggling caring, I'm juggling, you know, taking him to college, picking him up, you know, I'm running a charity, I'm doing events. I know I'm a workaholic, but I'm very passionate and I'm very driven.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, he's a regular feature on this show. He's done his best to completely destroy the established church in this country. Here he was last night in the House of Lords speaking on the Rwanda debate.
We go back to the development of international human rights law, particularly in the period after 1945, in totally separating domestic and international law. The rise in international human rights law grew out of the horrors of the 1940s, where a government that in 1933 in Germany had been legally and properly elected passed horrific laws that did terrible things, starting from within a few weeks of the election of Adolf Hitler.
It's extraordinary. He's drawing a direct comparison between this government's behaviour and that of Hitler's National Socialists in office in Germany in the 1930s. He did, though, say later on in the speech that the scale of what was happening here wasn't quite as bad as Hitler. I mean, what on earth is he doing? It is never, ever useful in any debate or conversation to draw any comparison with Hitler at all. I firmly, firmly believe that. Furthermore, he talks about Churchill in this speech of the 1951 Convention on Human Rights. Yes, that was designed for a post-war world after we'd seen direct racial and religious, well, not just persecution, actually extermination. Here we now are, over 70 years on, with hundreds of millions of people wanting to move around the world, some with good intentions, many not. The whole thing drives me mad. I honestly think we should try and get rid of this bloke if we possibly could. Well, I'm joined by Richard Petrovich, Professor of Law at Aberystwyth University and Vice President of the Council of Europe's group, Experts Against Trafficking of Humans. And Richard, you know, we all want sensible international cooperation and agreements, but he seems to be glorifying the fact that the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg can override acts by our elected government, and somehow draws a comparison with National Socialism. And I put it to you that this is not what this was designed to do back in 1951.
I think that the Archbishop of Canterbury is overstating the case by seriously overstating the case by comparing the UK with Nazi Germany. But the issue that I think he is raising, which is real, is that there is no safe and legal way for people to migrate to the UK. I know that the Home Secretary has spoken about this, but there's no safe and legal way. The only way to come to the UK is by small boats, because we are on an island. And I think that the UK has to do its bit to accept people who have nowhere else to go. Germany has accepted more than 1 million. Turkey has accepted 4 million. We've accepted 50,000.
No. That's absolute rot, isn't it? We've accepted 500,000 people since 2016 as refugees into this country, and they've come here from Afghanistan, and they've come here from Hong Kong, and they've come here from Ukraine. And I would argue that, you mentioned Germany, 1 million. Well, they haven't taken them willingly, but they've turned up across the Mediterranean, and the Germans have felt there isn't much they can do about it.
There isn't much they could do about it, because they are on continental Europe and they had no choice. We have a choice, and we choose, because we are an island, not to accept people. Now, one thing I do think is very important is that there should not be uncontrolled migration into any country. The UK, like any country, has a right to protect its borders. But that does not mean, in my opinion, that we should be isolating ourselves from that. We are a wealthy country, and I think we could be doing a lot more. And when I hear today about the Calais Agreement, which James Cleverly was talking about, he talks about this as a good move forward. And in some ways it is. But I think it's very unfortunate that the UK is talking about working with social media. UK should be legislating to force social media to tackle online activity that promotes people smuggling. The social media is something which is almost out of control, and the UK could be doing more, not to work with them, but to force them to do more to actually reduce the risks for people who are going onto small boats.
Yeah, I mean, the Calais Agreement, so-called, that's been struck today, James Cleverly, between us and the French and one or two others, it's designed, isn't it, to stop the supply of small boats getting to the beaches, to stop the weapon, effectively, that is being used by the traffickers. But the problem is, the financial reward for the traffickers is so great that on a calm week in the summer, one gang can make 3-4 million euros.
Yeah, I agree. That's why they're doing it. That's why criminals do these things. But there's another aspect of this. What do we mean by small boats? Do we mean dinghies? Do we mean speedboats? I have not seen any attempt to define what will be those small boats. And if you're trying to introduce new laws, you need to be very specific about that. And I think that what I have heard so far is actually rather too vague, and I would like to see more about it. But also, I would like to see more about the UK doing its bit to find safe and legal ways to bring people to the UK who really have, in my opinion, very little choice. You don't leave your home in Iraq or Syria because you just think it's going to be better in the UK. You leave because you're desperate.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because 91% of those that landed last year were men. Of those, about 78% were young men. These weren't women and children. These weren't the traditional pictures we would associate with refugees. These were fit young men, and many of whom, of course, were coming to this country and go into criminality. And that's the problem. You've got the gangs operating
if you're a fit young man,
at both ends.
If you're a fit young man, then there's a good chance you'll be forced into the army or into some militia group or something like that. So I think there's a very good reason why fit young men are trying to leave those countries. I am not trying to say that the UK should be open to all irregular migrants. Absolutely not. But I think that we could be doing a lot more to do our fair share.
Richard, you've made your point, made it very passionately. Thank you for joining me this evening. Now, over the course of the last 2 days, over 700 people have crossed the English Channel on small boats. Why? Because the weather's good. And this is why I was getting so upset with James Cleverly over the Christmas period. Oh, look, no one's coming. Well, it was blowing 50 miles an hour every day. We've written to him today, Dear Home Secretary, I'm a producer for Nigel Farage's show on GB News. Last year you claimed the 33% reduction in small boats was a sign your plan was working. At the time you said bad weather was not a contributory factor to the decreasing number of crossings. You'll be aware Nigel Farage disagreed. Well, that's a mild understatement. Now the skies are clearing and new data shows, and we go on to show that now more people have crossed this year that had crossed at this time last year. We offered him a 10-minute slot, one-on-one, any time between 7 and 8 tonight, to show us how determined he was to stop the vote, so we haven't yet heard back. It's going to be tomorrow. It's going to be as flat as a pancake. There'll be many, many hundreds right now getting ready in the sand dunes all across northern France. And even if the French police intercept boat after boat, there'll be plenty of others that follow. And all the while you can come to this country and you realise your risk of deportation is hovering around about 1.2%, and that actually you'll be put into a nice hotel, you can then abscond and if you wish join a criminal gang with almost no chance of being caught. People will continue to come, and it's just as simple as that. Rwanda, Jacob, was designed to be that disincentive, but last night knocked down 5 times by the House of Lords. Is the House of Lords out of touch with the public? It seems it really is.
Huge majorities as well.
Yeah.
I mean, over 100, which is very big for the House of Lords. I noted Baroness Hale showed her true political colours, voting against the government. They're all Europhiles, interestingly.
The former boss of the
Supreme Court, yes. And you notice almost all the people voting against Rwanda are the Europhiles who prefer senior law to come from abroad than to be made by Parliament. It's basically constitutional.
The same point the Archbishop made.
The same point the Archbishop makes. They believe that foreign law is better than British law, and I believe that democratically accounted British law is better. I think if Lord Anderson of Ipswich, who's a very distinguished, sensible man, said on the radio yesterday that in the end the Lords would back down, that their job is to make the House of Commons think twice. Now, I hope he's right. I think it is reasonable for the Lords to ask the Commons to think twice, but it wouldn't be reasonable for them to stick to their view against something that the bulk of the British people want to see done.
Yes, and the bulk of the British people, and that's very clear and consistent over a long period of time. It isn't just a snapshot poll. It's been there for a very, very long time. Jacob, tonight, what have you got?
We're going to be talking about the budget tomorrow. I've got the great Patrick Mintford coming on to have a discussion with him. And what are we going to see?
Well, I'm going to see up in Whitehaven. I'll be doing a live show there after Michelle Dewberry tomorrow night. Join me from Whitehaven live at 7 o'clock tomorrow. I wonder, what's the weather going to be like?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Showers today, but they are fading away and most will have a dry night. A little bit of fog and frost likely in the southwest. Low pressure is out in the Atlantic. It tries to move in, but it's getting blocked and stopped by a big area of high pressure. That is the dominant feature, and it is allowing a bit more cloud to drift into the east. We've seen some heavy showers across the southeast. They are drifting away. Still a few scattered showers here and there through the night. A lot of cloud in eastern England and eastern Scotland. Clearer skies further west. That will allow it to turn quite cold. A touch of frost through rural parts of Wales and southwest England, and some freezing fog patches around, so maybe affecting the M4 and the M5 first thing in the morning. Could take a few hours to clear away. Generally quite a grey day again in the east, particularly on the east coast, with a breeze freshening